Welcome to Legal Innovation Spotlight, the podcast that brings you the latest advancements in legal tech and knowledge management. I'm Ted Theodoropoulos, and I connect with the industry's brightest minds to provide you with valuable insights and actionable takeaways. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Neill Pemberton, how are you this morning, or I guess afternoon in your side of the world?
Yeah, I'm doing well, Ted. Thanks. It is the afternoon. We're coming up to 4:30 over in the UK. It's dark, and like I say, I'm hoping that you will be able to bring me some sunshine this afternoon with an interesting conversation.
Well, I'll do my best. No guarantees. Well, good stuff. I took a look at your background, and I think we had some conversation previously on LinkedIn, and then had a chat that I thought was very insightful. And I thought your background was super interesting. You had spent some time in legal at Dentons. You spent some time on the vendor side, and now you're an associate partner at IBM. Mm-hmm. And I was unaware of IBM's offering that aligns with legal, so I thought it'd be a great conversation. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and where you do it?
Yeah, great. Will do. Thank you. Well, I started my legal career back in about 2005, worked my way up from the bottom, so to speak, as a paralegal, 18 months training contract, which is what we do in the UK, or England at least. 2 years almost of that. I got 6 months off for time to count, which was good. 3 years later, I was at a regional firm in Bristol in the southwest of England where I live. And I was looking for a bit of a new challenge, really, having spent 6 years at my first firm. An opportunity at Dentons, as you say, that came up. Joined them in about 2011 and worked there for 10 years very happily. But, after 16 years or so of doing what was essentially the same thing, commercial real estate work, which I enjoyed for a long time, I started to get a bit itchy and looking around for other alternatives. And once I started looking around, a whole world of opportunity opened up to me. So a mentor of mine that I'd ended up working with at Dentons and really went out on a limb for me that got me working in the technology, media, telecom space. I found the technology work just to be much, much more interesting. And yeah, once I started looking around, opportunities just that I never thought were there, came up. So there are no in-house opportunities for commercial real estate lawyers over here. So what happened was the company that I joined after Dentons, they were a startup like just 2 or 3 years before, and they had such a compelling proposition that when they'd raised money that meant they could afford me, I was jumping at an opportunity to go and work for them. A real first look at AI, pre-generative AI, actually, to try and help them automate some real estate reporting, which is what my domain expertise was. I joined there. They'd already had a couple of what we called legal engineers working there, some very skilled people. But at one point, it was just me. I grew that team up to about 8-9 people. And then generative AI came along, got really, really interesting. And eventually, IBM just came knocking. And that, to me, was just too good of an opportunity not to explore it. I joined the startup with a view to expanding my horizons, and the horizons don't get much bigger than IBM. So when they came knocking, they were looking for someone who knew legal, someone who'd had their hands on the tech. And I was, I guess, at the intersection of their Venn diagram. So here I am.
Interesting. So yeah, I think I mentioned this in the intro. Like I didn't realize that IBM had an offering aligned with the legal vertical. I hear about the EYs of the world and other. You hear a lot of ALSPs, but I didn't know how big is the group that you work in, and are you guys exclusively legal, or is it broader than that?
So I sit within IBM Consulting, which globally is just huge. I didn't know much about IBM Consulting before I joined. To me, I did grow up in the States, as may be obvious from the whiteboard and the Denver Broncos helmet in the background. Sorry to anyone who's a Kansas City fan. So IBM Tech in the 80s was just huge. So I was well aware of that part of the business. I wasn't so aware of the consulting side. We have in-house lawyers, and that's not really what my domain is. My domain is to work with professional services firms in general, which includes obviously legal. And just try and help their business. I mean, IBM has been improving businesses for 100 plus years, right? So part of my job is taking the best of breed that we've got in-house in terms of technology. But we do partner with lots of other people, Microsoft, Adobe, Oracle, Salesforce, you name it. We will partner with other vendors. We'll do what's best for the client. So we offer a traditional consulting, I suppose, with the untraditional, if that's a real word, aspect that we have this big technology offering behind us. And my job is to go out and look at ways that we can improve not just the practice of law, but the business of law as well.
Interesting. Yeah, it's been almost exactly 2 years since ChatGPT made its debut, and I think that really changed everyone's perspective way beyond the legal industry, but within the legal industry itself. The status quo is very sticky in legal, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's lawyers tend to be, they really tend to embrace status quo, not always the most open to change.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really rattled some cages at senior levels, at the executive committee levels
Yeah.
in law firms. Like, wow. And we saw things like the Goldman report that came out that 44% of legal tasks could be automated by AI, which I've said multiple times. I think that's a gross overestimate. Maybe one day, but we are a long way from that one day. And when you saw a trajectory. So in November of 2022, when 3.5 was released and scored 60 some odd percentile on the bar, and then 4.0 was released, I think 6 or 8 months later, and it scored over, the initial indications was it scored over 90 on the bar. People really took notice, like, that's a very steep innovation curve.
Mm-hmm.
Things have flattened out since then a smidge, and there's a lot of talk in AI circles about scaling laws and whether more parameters is going to continue to produce the incremental improvements that we have seen previously. I think that again, this is Ted's opinion here. I'm not an expert, but I'm an enthusiast. I follow the space closely. Once you get over about 1 trillion parameters, and I think the latest GPT models, I'm not sure, I think maybe 4.0 is about 1.8 trillion. I might have that number wrong, but it's somewhere in that vicinity.
Yeah.
Once you get over 1 trillion parameters, things start to level out a smidge. And I don't know if throwing more parameters and more data at these models is going to ultimately get us back on that steep innovation curve. There's a lot of debate about it. I mean, if you listen to Sam Altman, he says the trajectory is right on pace and you can expect the same level of innovation. I mean, I've noticed anecdotally a little bit of a flattening. So I don't know. Do you have any sense of kind of the trajectory we're on versus where we started?
Yes, although not in the sense of how many trillions of parameters we might have. And in fact, to be a little contrarian, we do really well with way less, right? If you look at the IBM series of models, there's a series that we call Granite, which is our in-house variety, and it's open source, so people are welcome to go and look at it and try it, right? We've just released Granite 3.0, and it's got 8 billion. And you look at the sums and say, how on earth would 8 billion compete with 1.8 trillion or whatever the number is, being some significant? I'm not even going to try and do the arithmetic on it because I'm not that good in my head, but way less. I think the difference is and can be that, like you say, maybe we just don't need that many parameters. I mean, 1.2 trillion, 1.8 trillion, I can't even fathom what that looks like. I can't even fathom what 8 billion looks like. So, we can get a lot out of small models, using them intelligently, training them on good data rather than just all data. And I think that's probably one of our key differentiators. And it's not the only one. But what we're quite keen on looking at is, well, what can we achieve the most with using the least, if I can put it that way? We use a small model. It's faster, it's cheaper, it's greener. And there are a lot of advantages to that. And to your point earlier about how quickly we scale and get to 40, this 44% number that we heard about, that's a while off. And to me, that takes an awful lot of time and effort and energy on the part of whoever's using the models. setting them up with the right workflows, doing the right prompting, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't really have an idea on that, although I will say what's interesting from my perspective, trajectory-wise, is how quickly some of the open source models have been catching up with some of the proprietary models. I find that quite interesting. And I say we use our own models, but we use others too, right? We use Llama and all sorts in our day-to-day work, and we find we can get good results using small models. So I think it's about how you use it rather than what it is that you use.
Yeah, there are some better. There are some interesting. I've heard some interesting use cases for small models, specifically the ones that are downloadable and able to run locally on a laptop. One is from a privacy perspective. So I spoke to someone. I can't remember if it was on a podcast or outside of that. Somebody was telling me about they created a process for a patent attorney where he would download a small model. I forget, it may have been Llama, and
Mm-hmm.
they built some sort of interface on top that would
Yep.
allow him to automate these patent applications, which I don't know, he did 3 or 4 a week. And then he would delete the models and download fresh every time he needed to do this, and which sounds like a big deal, but it's not with some of the smaller models. So, that's one way to achieve privacy until we get to a place where these larger models have these enterprise grade security controls in place. I know OpenAI does, and as do some others, but yeah, I mean, I think there are interesting use cases. I did a quick search. Yeah, Llama 3.1 has 8 billion, 70 billion. They have a 405 billion
Yep.
parameter
Yep.
version. So yeah, I mean, I think obviously OpenAI is the monster. I would imagine Anthropic has a similar is in a similar ballpark. But yeah, there are interesting applications to some of the smaller models.
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the ways that we've done it, we as a company know what's gone into our models because we made them, right? We trained them. It's all enterprise data. It's not what you get on, as the classic phrase of Reddit blogs or whatever it is that is the criticism of the larger models. So in theory, there's no garbage in any of the models that we use, and we can tell people and underwrite what's in there, and we do, and we publish the information on all of that. How we've gone about it's available, and you can find it on IBM's website. So being open about it is good, and I think what's that phrase? Garbage in, garbage out, rubbish in, rubbish out, whatever the right terminology is. That's sort of our view. Well, that's the view that I'm hearing anyway, at least, is that we train it on good stuff and we get better results than you might otherwise think with a small model. And, I go back to it. I wouldn't underestimate the importance of low cost, low energy consumption and low carbon emission for the people who need to report that sort of thing. And I think everybody's interested in low cost. So that's certainly my experience, especially with lawyers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've even noticed as a consumer, as someone who leverages the consumer paid versions of some of the big models. I use the
Mm.
ChatGPT Pro and the Claude paid subscription. Every time I go into Claude now, it's by default in concise mode because
Mm-hmm.
of high usage and they're trying to manage token consumption. I've also heard, this is unconfirmed, but there's been a big dip in performance in Copilot, that there's a lot of suspicion and scuttlebutt that it's token throttling to
Okay.
manage resource consumption. So, yeah, I mean, every day I know myself as a consumer of these tools, every day I expand the scope and more and more usage every single day as I learn new ways to leverage the technology.
Yeah.
That's not unique to me. That everybody's doing that, and
Mm.
it's just going to create more and more demand. So I think, to your point, finding ways to mitigate that situation is going to be a desirable outcome for both the providers and the consumers of the technology.
Yeah, I think so. And I don't know what the motives are behind, 4.0 mini and Microsoft Phi's model, the smaller models that they're bringing out. There'll be a reason in it. It maybe it'll be monetarily. It may well be energy consumption. I don't know. But if you get the likes of the big software companies talking about building nuclear power stations to generate the energy that's going to go into building their, or rather powering their models. I think that says something. Just put it into context, we've been in need of a new nuclear power station near where I am for a long time, and it takes our government an awfully long time to do it. So I think Google and Microsoft are going to build them a lot faster than our government's going to do it. So you do it because you need to, and I suspect that doing that is not cheap, and using smaller models and getting similarly good results out is the way to go.
Yeah. Yeah, I know there needs to be some innovation in the nuclear world as well. I mean, having a 15-year timeline and, tens of billions of dollars that's not a scalable approach. And there has not been a tremendous amount. I'm not an expert in that field, but I've read up on it recently as a result of all this and found it really interesting. And they are starting to come up with some new ways to approach this problem. And I think now there's a real motivation just because of the massive power consumption that I don't know if you saw. Did you see Elon stood up a data center? I forget how many hundreds of thousands of NVIDIA GPUs, but he did it in something like 130 days, and it's massive. Okay. Multi-football field size data center that he stood up in like under 4 months. Or maybe just over 4 months, but it's incredible. And where's all the power going to come from in those scenarios?
I don't know, but I think he's probably the kind of guy that will figure that out very quickly. And he's also figuring out the energy distribution system for cars. So literally more power to the guy, right? He's got all the knowledge. So,
yeah.
No, I had not heard that, but that doesn't surprise me with something like it.
There's a real cool, for those that are curious, there's a real cool YouTube video out there that walks you through the end product, and it's just like 3 months, 4 months, whatever the number was. It's outstanding. Well, getting back to the AI and legal, you've been around AI and legal pre-LLM, and you've kind of seen the transition. I would imagine, there was some machine learning applications that you were involved in, and neural networks. Like what the transition from those legacy AI models to LLMs, people think it's almost like a association that we have now. AI, people think LLMs, but AI has existed in legal for much longer than 2 years, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, when I joined the startup company I was at, Orbital Witness, there was no generative AI, or if there was, we weren't using it, and it wasn't really available to us. That was labeled data and supervised learning, sort of older school way of doing things. For me, still very fascinating, very interesting, and I felt cutting edge, because a lot of people just weren't doing it. We've all been talking about AI automation for a long time, but actually actual use day to day inside of firms, at least in my network, not happening that much. And it wasn't happening that much, a bit more nowadays. So I started out my AI journey labeling documents with a team of other people, and sounds easy, but it wasn't. It's not just highlight and select your category. It's, how am I going to think about cutting up this document in a way that means when I train the model really knows what this paragraph is relating to, because some paragraphs relate to more than one thing. So there was whole taxonomies involved there, and it required quite a deep understanding of what you were doing to be able to use it, at least in my experience. And it was laborious, because you to get a decent result, you needed, let's say, 1,000 things to do it really well, with enough variety in there. So access to that stuff is hard. Getting 1,000 things labeled as a minimum, I would say, is hard, time consuming and expensive. So when generative AI came along, and you could just effectively give a model a few keywords and some, what do they call it, semantics, that it can just go and figure out what clause you're looking for, I just changed the landscape entirely. So for me, I felt it was a bit of a shame to throw away some of the work that we've done. And I think a lot of firms probably could still leverage what they have done in the past. Some firms I know were doing it for a long time and have got a big backlog of labeled data that they can, and in my view, should use, as long as they can do it in a cost-effective way, because it's great for retrieval. You can get really high levels of accuracy with it. But I suppose generative AI created a bit more of a level playing field. And I don't know whether I think we may have talked about it briefly before, but it was new at the time. Adelshaw Goddard had done a report whereby they'd given their associates or selected people within the firm effectively a prompt library that they could go and do retrieval jobs for corporate support kind of work, where they would go out and find the nominated clauses that they decided to go and try and find. And this is like super powered control F, right? They can go out and find all the clauses that they want, really writing a few rules. I don't want to diminish the work they've done because it's incredible. And if people haven't read the report, it's worth a read. You now can catch up, I think, with a lot of these people who have been doing labeled data for years. And so don't throw it away, but maybe focus your efforts on things like that.
Yeah, I've got the report. I think you shared it with me. It is interesting. It's 50 pages, and I've just kind of skimmed, but it is very interesting. So, one thing that you'd mentioned earlier, you talked about business versus practice of law use cases, and I have a pretty strong opinion on that as well. I really feel like law firms should be focused on an incremental strategy or an incremental implementation to an AI strategy, and I do feel like the cost benefit ratio or the risk reward, however you want to frame it up, on the business of law side works out a little better at the moment. And on the risk side, within the practice of law world, you've got a number of issues. You've got privacy, you've got client restrictions on generative AI use. I think probably the biggest risk that doesn't get talked about enough is lawyers have a very low tolerance for missteps and wasting their time, and rolling something out before it really is battle tested and has a clear ROI and can allow them to leverage time, I think is a big mistake. And I'm seeing it happen now, like with Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, for example. I'm not a fan at the moment. I know that Microsoft will get it right. I think right now it needs a lot of work. It's, just, really bizarre challenges, or I guess limitations with Copilot. So Copilot has no memory. So, even though it has vast access to vast troves of your writing, when you draft in Copilot or Word, it doesn't leverage any of that. So you basically have to upload a style document with every prompt when you're drafting. And all of your, it has a very basic RAG implementation where you can leverage 3 documents. They all have to be in OneDrive. And when you upload them into OneDrive, sometimes it takes up to 24 hours for them to show up for you to access. You basically throw a backslash in there, or maybe it's a / to leverage the document. It's just not an efficient model. I know Microsoft's going to get it right, but this is, in my opinion, a beta product, and they're charging $30 a month for it. And all the marketing is selling firms, and I'm seeing it. They're pushing it out. In fact, I don't know if it's, I can't remember the name of the firm. There are a couple. Clifford Chance is one I know for sure. They released a case study. I have a lot of questions about the numbers in there. I think it was kind of it was put together in collaboration with Microsoft. So I don't know if those numbers are optimistic or realistic, but I don't know. What is your take on business versus practice of law, and where to start and that sort of stuff?
Yeah, it's a tough question. You're a gym guy, right? So losing fat and building muscle at the same time is just sort of how I see it. Right? Those two things are really hard. Really hard. But I suspect that the management of firms is such that you can divide and conquer to a degree. And if there are savings to be had in the back office business support functions, then you can use those savings to leverage up and pay up on the front office support stuff. I agree with you in many ways on the Copilot stuff. I don't have an intimate knowledge of it myself to that extent of using it. Albeit, what I would say is that will come as a package, I'm sure, with what Microsoft offers. And there will be ways and means, I'm sure, of using it in the right kind of way. If it is if it is sort of summarizing notes from meetings, that is useful, right? If you use it in such a way as you can engineer a series of small prompts that can generate a report for you that don't necessarily need a playbook sitting in the background, but you just ask a series of questions and chain them together of a document, and then you get a useful report out of it. That's a good use case, in my opinion. And I'm sure there's plenty that people could be doing on that. I guess I'm a little bit biased in that my personal preference is to try and help the lawyers be more productive. That was my goal. IBM was certainly, we've done a lot of useful things in that space. We've done some projects with in-house legal as well. There was a case study we did with NatWest Bank, which is one of the big banks over here in the UK, where we help them ingest their own playbook. They then can, as almost like a word plugin, where the model will read the playbook, it'll read the incoming clause, and it will make recommendations and all sorts of great stuff like that, like you can imagine. But we've been, international business machines. We've been working on the back office side of things for an awfully long time, and whether that's the traditional model of outsourcing, and now it's AI first business process outsourcing. So how can we move some work that is manual at the moment onto a model? That's an area that I think is really interesting. And one I'm really keen to explore. You can imagine the potential use cases for things like generative AI in talent acquisition. The whole process of reviewing applications and arranging meetings and so on and so on. That's all well within the wheelhouse of what we have nowadays. And not all of it will be generative AI, of course, but a lot of it will be. I guess I see a lot of easy wins for the firms in the back office. And like your point earlier, you can't. I don't think too many of us are going to trust what the models produce straight out of the gate and send it to our client without it being checked. So there's always going to be that phrase of human in the loop for a while at least, right? It's great for an augmentation, speeding up tool, but I see a lot of potential on the back office side of things.
Yeah. Well, and that was one of the caveats in the Clifford Chance study. Was it did a good job listing out some of the use cases, and one of them was summarization. Mm-hmm. But then the asterisk was, but you should still be manually reviewed. It's just like, wait a second, or something along those lines.
Yeah, sure.
And it's just like, you're not saving me any time. If I have to go read the entire thread because I can't trust the technology to summarize and capture the main points, then it's not helping me, or it's helping me minimally. And don't get me wrong, I use AI 10, 20 times a day. So I find a lot of really valuable use for it, where I think I run into challenges mentally getting to a place where, all right, how are we going to calculate ROI on a implementation of a platform? Well, it's got to, on the timekeeper side, it's got to save them time, right?
Yeah.
And if there's manual checking that has to go in, how does that impact that ROI equation? For drafting, again, this is not just a co-pilot. I mean, just in general, I think that yes, there will have to be some manual, oversight, the humans in the loop. To your point. Mm-hmm. On the summarization side, again, I think that I use it for summarization quite frequently, but for low risk things, right? Like, honestly, I'm going to stick that AG report in and have Claude summarize it for me. And if it misses a couple points, it's not the end of the world. But if I'm a client facing thread that deals with a important matter, I'm not going to trust AI to summarize it. I'm going to read it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, a lot of firms are looking, I think, for new ways of doing, how can we use AI to open up new work methodologies and new work possibilities? And, I suppose the ideal scenario is you have an AI which is perfect and your clients just plug in and start getting what they need. And you have that dream scenario where you get paid while you're sleeping. Everybody wants a bit of that, I think. well, you've got a long way to go before we get there. Right? These models, you're going to have to be really sure that it's right. There are bound to be regulatory issues that people are going to have to grapple with. Some of which you can probably navigate in the terms and conditions, but probably not all. I see, though, the current state as still useful, having the human in the loop, in that, depending on how you structure the way you use the models, you could collect an awful lot of ground truth data, which these firms may have currently unstructured sitting in their iManage account or wherever right now. If you sort of move that to a new world of generative AI produced data, which you then validate or confirm is correct or wrong, you will over time build up quite a nice additional set of data against which you can quickly monitor. So when the models do improve and when workflows, et cetera, improve, if you've got the right governance in place that allows you to manage and monitor all of these different models, which people are eventually going to build up to, then swapping in a better model should be simple. And then people may well get to a point where their accuracy levels are so high that they're happy to. I'd loathe to use the word risk it, but but it's probably no more risky than a person, than a human being doing the work at a certain point. So I think if you get the governance right, that's going to be critical for a lot of firms, especially when they do start using a lot of agents, or rather assistants. Maybe they will use a lot of agents too. Today, it's possible, I think, that you can build up a lot of assistants that will do an awful lot of stuff for you. And although the time saving is not necessarily what you hope for, it's not wasted, in my view.
Yeah. Yeah. And to be clear, it is blatantly obvious where the most bottom line impact is going to come from in terms of use cases. It clearly is on the practice of law side. The opportunity cost for, time spent on anything other than delivering work product is obviously very high for $1,000 plus an hour timekeepers. I just, having, let's say, KM, for example, or marketing or finance, leveraging the tools, especially KM, that's ultimately going to support the timekeepers in probably either KM or innovation, designing the strategy, providing the support, having them familiar and in a place where they're using the technology every day seems wise. But to your point, there are, if you're looking for bottom line impact, it's on that side of the business. But you and I talked about like different segments, kind of like large, mid, and small law. We can define that any way we want. For me, when I think about it from a vendor perspective, like small law is anything 100 attorneys and under. Again, everybody has different ways of defining this. Mid law feels like 100 to 500 attorneys, and large law feels like 500 and up. Do you feel like there are different value propositions in those different segments of the law firm world with respect to AI?
Yeah, probably. Although I personally think a lot of the difference of value proposition is down to the work that they do, maybe more so than the size of the firm. I think, we may have been talking about this in the context of workflow and how we think AI is going to improve workflow. And again, anecdotally, I've heard a lot of lawyers say, "I know what I do is so specialized, you can't stick a workflow on it. It just doesn't." I would disagree with that to a large extent. Anything that you can write down into a set of rules can be automated. I see, over here we have some parts of the legal industry, conveyancing, will writing, probate. A lot of that is relatively formulaic. It's process driven, and to some degree, entry level sort of debt recovery litigation work. That is to a large extent form filling. It isn't always small firms that do those, but it tends to be. I think they can get an awful lot out of old school AI automation products. The new generative AI stuff, I guess for now, is probably within the domain of the bigger firms. It's difficult to tell, to be perfectly honest with you, whether I think the small firms can certainly benefit from generative AI, but whether they need it or not, I'm not convinced. entirely. It just depends, I think, on how much they're following our formula.
Yeah, where I see the difference, and maybe this is subtle, is the clients that these different size firms serve,
Mm-hmm.
right? So in the 100 attorney and under, in the small law space, for example, you have customers like my company,
Yeah.
and we don't have outside counsel guidelines with restrictions about use on AI on our stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
big law, and especially in the financial services world, or really any firm that caters to heavily regulated industries, there's a lot that goes into that. So I feel like there's a ton of opportunity on the smaller end of the
Mm-hmm.
spectrum. And then conversely, you know, a small law firm's not buying Harvey, right? They're
Yeah.
not even
Yeah.
in the target market. They probably wouldn't even be able to get a demo,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
But they do have access to some of the paid consumer tools out there. Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
they have access to Copilot, and I feel like a smaller law firm as well could be nimble in their rollout. Right, big firms have to do things in very formally and
Mm.
um, strategically. So yeah, it's interesting. I think the clients that law firms serve also maybe is going to have some influence until these tools get
Yeah.
to a place that they're widely available to all ends of the spectrum, and the outside counsel guidelines aren't restrictive like they are in some cases now.
Yeah, I think you're right. The clients are going to influence a lot. And funnily enough, I came across a very interesting case study internally not that long ago where we'd done a generative AI powered bot customer facing. It's probably not right to call it a bot, but a customer chat interface for banks, and we've done it for a few banks and some of the really big ones too, where their customer complaints are dealt with largely through that. And this pushes a lot of work away from, in our case, the legal people who would be very expensive, or maybe you've got claims handlers or whoever it is. You can do a lot more with a lot less in that sense. People get much faster responses. And I think a younger generation is going to be perfectly at ease dealing with a chat interface if they get the answer they want, as long as you can do it reliably. I've been thinking about how does that apply to legal? In my old world, there is no way that a lot of the clients I used to work for are going to be happy with that. They're going to email me or in my previous role and say, I want the answer to this, or I've got a new job for you for this. So it doesn't immediately translate, albeit to the point about the smaller businesses, a lot of them probably can do that now. What's the update on my house acquisition right now? A lot of people won't care who they're dealing with. They'll just want to know, why haven't I had an answer on this for a week? What's going on? And okay, there's some things to work through there. But what do you give the model access to in order to give them the answer? Because I'm sure there'll be bits and pieces of information you won't want to expose. Again, it's a sort of make sure you dot the I's and cross the T's and your governance is all done correctly. But actually, inside of big law too, I think you can apply that maybe to the lawyers. If you envisage the lawyer as a client and your back office function, and we do this internally, we call it client zero. We do everything to ourselves first. So we have an Ask IBM system where if I need something from HR or IT, I just ask through the system, and by and large, I get the answer without bothering anyone. So I think there's that kind of thing could be rolled out in different ways across large and small. At least that's my hope.
Yeah. Now that makes sense. And, so we have rolled out, they are probably maybe just over the mid law threshold, a firm. So we're an intranet, extranet
Mm-hmm.
company, and we work exclusively with law firms. We don't have any customers outside of the law firm world, not even on the inside counsel side of the table. And one of our clients, we built a chatbot internal facing where they can ask policy questions
Mm-hmm.
into a chat interface on their intranet. So this could be things about what is their how much time left do they have via their PTO allocation? What is their ethical threshold for vendor gifting? What is their laptop reimbursement policy? Any policy question. And you know what? It's gone over really well. It has internally, we're finding, so this system is about maybe 3 months deployed, and they can't wait to increase the scope. They're taking an incremental strategy to this. But even busy lawyers who, again, have a low tolerance for BS and talking to a chatbot, they found they're getting really good adoption. I think the key there is this is a highly curated data set, and the performance is excellent. Like, you get back good answers because it's been tested. It's a small corpus of data. We've been able to really, they've done the testing to make sure that when questions get answered, and they got a little thumbs up, thumbs down, so someone can rate the response, and they dig in and they do the work. When they get a thumbs down, they figure out why and how can they do better next time. So I think there's real opportunity for that in legal.
Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree more. If I was a COO of a big law firm, I think I'd be saying, where can I apply this in a very safe environment? It does matter if you get it wrong, because you'll annoy your internal people who you're trying to keep happy. And recruitment, it's hard enough, and you don't want to make it worse. But I think it's a big opportunity, and also for the lawyers out there who, unfortunately, every now and again still have to manually print their billing guides and then walk it around to the partner to sign it, etc. There's a whole bunch of process there that could be looked at, automated, and just improved significantly. And you then get an awful lot of time back. So to your point about searching for something, I mean, if somebody's got to go onto an intranet site manually, try and find it. I mean, even locating the right document can be hard. And a lot of policies, as a person who hasn't written too many of them, they all look and sound the same. And I don't want to have to read through it to know where I'm going. I mean, when I had my first child, it took me forever to figure out how much paid paternity leave I was going to get. And that's an hour or whatever, maybe an hour and a half of billing time that I lost because I was too busy trying to figure out what am I going to do when this child arrives? And it really should have been a simple type it into a chat interface. What do I do about my first child? And it presumably told me. So I think you've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting. And again, that's kind of an internal facing. I'll still call that a business of law. It touches the timekeepers, but it's a business of law use case.
Absolutely.
What about the you and I talked about the lone wolf mindset of lawyers and its impact on the technology implementation. I mean, it's a well documented. Dr. Larry Richard has studied tens of thousands of lawyers. In his book Lawyer Brain, he talks about how he ranks lawyers on several personality traits, one of which is autonomy, and they are off the chart. I forget what the number is. I think it's like, in the 70, 80 percentile, whatever the number. So they kind of have this lone wolf mentality. How do you feel that that impacts impacts technology implementation, especially when it comes to some of the stuff we're talking about here? Do you think there's an impact or no?
I'll have to read those books, but which I've not. But my gut instinct is yes. There's an impact. Even though law firms, in many ways, are big groups of partners, the way I look at it is very often you have a few really, really big partners that will make a lot of decisions, and they may effectively operating their own firm within a firm. And a lot of firms are structured that way, actually, frankly, aren't they? They're based out of Switzerland and all these different variants that are underneath them, or in some cases, they're somewhat like a franchise. So I think it must be true. And I think it's a bit of a shame. And I suppose when you are faced with a decision that I could take home $1 million this year, or £1 million in my case, not my personal case, that would be nice, but or 900,000. I'll take the $1 million, and I know I'm exaggerating the numbers a bit, but the idea of spending money on something which might help me 5 years down the line, maybe not that long, but it's going to take a bit of time to play out. Maybe I won't do that. And I think a lot of firms have come a long way. They've set up innovation teams, they've done a lot of good stuff to recognize the need to invest in the future. And also, people living longer, partners hang around longer, they make partner early nowadays, and maybe they see the value in future investment. But yeah, there's definitely somewhat of a lone wolf mentality going on, I think. And I think you can probably point to, again, going back and anecdotally, you hear stories about things being a really good fit and have been tested and gone through various layers of approval, and then all of a sudden that certain things are no longer approved. And I think that's probably down to some people saying, I just don't see the advantage to this kind of thing for me, so let's not do it. I've heard stories along those lines.
Yeah. And your point about kind of the power structure in big law is I think is also interesting. A lot of people rise through the ranks in law firm leadership because they're the best at lawyering.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? As opposed to being the best leader or being the most capable person to sit in that leadership seat. And then you also have another dynamic of, retirement horizon. How close, because most of those partners, their retirement horizon is in sight. So if it's 3 years and the break even on a project is 5, am I going to vote to? No, I'm not. And law firms operate on a cash basis, and capital expenditures are don't really fit into that model. So. Yeah, well, this has been a really good conversation. Did you have some thoughts on that before we wrap
No.
up?
I was only going to say, I just the final point for me is I think a lot of firms have done really well, as I said, just to set up innovation teams and hubs, allocate money like we do, right? We put our money into our pension, we never see it; it just is there for us for a rainy day. And I think a lot of firms have embraced that, and good on them for doing so, because they will need to. Let's be honest. That we know that if you don't invest in the way you do your business in future, it's gonna start failing against the competitors that do. So that's it, really.
Yeah, I there is a lot of real work in innovation and real investment in innovation in legal, but I would say, again, this is anecdotal. There's no way to measure this. There's probably I'll say it like this. There's a significant amount of innovation theater as well. At least in the U.S., there's people, who I know. I've been selling into the legal or into the KM space for a long time before the word innovation existed as a role. And then all of a sudden I start seeing friends of mine, who are in KM, all of a sudden, instead of the CKO, they're the CKIO. And I reach out and say, hey, how has your role changed? And it hasn't. So they want to create the appearance of innovation, right? Because their clients want them to be more innovative. They want them to adopt new innovative ways of solving their problems. So yeah, there is, but again, not to downplay, you're absolutely correct. I know really good innovation teams out there, and there's plenty of them. It's just, sometimes firms are taking the easy route of slapping innovation on some titles and calling it a day.
Yeah, I think a lot of them have got an opportunity to buy stuff in, and I think it's a full-time job just reading the legal press, trying to keep on top of what's out there. There's a whole lot of people coming out with GPT wrappers that pretend to do something, and in many cases they will do great things, and in many cases they will do average things. But if you're in that role, you really got to have a look at everything. So that is a challenging job for sure, and I can see why I think some firms really they've bought into it big. They've appointed a new CIO, right? Like you said, it's a chief innovation officer now rather than just an information officer. And that's a big spend and a big commitment, and probably a necessary one with how much stuff there is out there to do. But from my side, I'm hopeful that people will try different things. They'll do some innovation work themselves in-house. They'll have some people that can work with technology providers like me. That's what I'm here for. Use me for scaling up stuff up, and you get something that works and looks good. come and talk to me, and I'll try and find the right people to say, well, will it accelerate the growth of that's working? And if there's anything that's not working, ditch it.
Yeah. Well, that's a good way to kind of tie a bow on this. How do people find out more about IBM's offering and what you do?
Yeah, well, there is a lot of offering, right? So best thing to do is probably just to message me. LinkedIn is the right place, I suspect. A lot of people get my name wrong. It's Nei, 2 L's for Neill. Unusual, but I can't help that. And so it's Neill Pemberton on LinkedIn. Just Google the name, you'll find it. And have a look around the IBM website. I mean, there is a whole treasure trove of information on there. And as I said, there's a lot of open source stuff. So people can go and try and just see what it's like. And we talked a little bit earlier. There's a lot of YouTube videos that IBM do as well.
They're excellent.
We'll explain all kinds of different things. The RAGs. We didn't even talk about agents today. We could do a whole session on something like that and the applicability of agents to legal work. Another conversation. So LinkedIn, IBM website, YouTube. I think those are probably good places to go.
Yeah, and we'll post links in the show notes to help guide people in the right direction. And yeah, it would be a good. I would love to stay in touch and maybe have you on sometime in the future to talk about some of the new work that big vendors and leaders, technology leading companies like IBM are doing in this space. So let's keep in touch.
Yeah, we'll do.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate your time here. Have a great weekend, and we will chat again soon.
Thanks, Ted. You too.
All right. Thanks, Neill. Thanks for listening to Legal Innovation Spotlight. If you found value in this chat, hit the subscribe button to be notified when we release new episodes. We'd also really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate us and leave us a review wherever you're listening right now. Your feedback helps us provide you with top-notch content. Want to dive deeper into the world of legal innovation? Connect with us online at getinfo-.com, where you'll find additional resources and articles. You can also follow us on social media at getinfo- to stay updated on the latest news and insights in the field of legal tech and knowledge management. Once again, thank you for joining us today on Legal Innovation Spotlight, a fireside chat series hosted by InfoDash.